A polished federal badge gleams under the harsh fluorescent lights of a gas station, completely ignored by a small-town cop with a massive ego. What happens when local police aggressively handcuff a black man, entirely unaware he is an elite Secret Service agent? The karma that follows will leave you speechless. The air at the Chevron station off Interstate 95 in Camden County, Georgia, was thick with the heavy humidity of a late August night. It was 2:14 a.m. The rhythmic buzzing of a flickering neon sign above the convenience store entrance was the only sound cutting through the quiet. Special Agent Donovan Brooks stood by pump number 4, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand. At 34 years old, Donovan had spent the last decade building an impeccable career in federal law enforcement. He was a man defined by discipline, currently assigned to the Presidential Protective Division of the United States Secret Service. Tonight, he was the advance scout for a high-level VIP motorcade that was roughly 20 miles behind him on the highway. Donovan was dressed perfectly for the job. A tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt without a tie, and polished dress shoes. His posture was military straight, a byproduct of his years in the Rangers before joining the agency. Parked beside him was an unmarked, heavily armored 2024 Chevrolet Suburban. It was painted a deep gloss black, featuring tinted ballistic windows and heavy-duty suspension that barely sagged under the weight of the tactical gear stored in the back. He took a sip of his coffee, nodding politely to the night clerk, a young woman named Amanda Collins, who was wiping down the glass doors inside the store. Donovan was exhausted. It had been a grueling 48-hour shift coordinating logistics, securing routes, and liaising with state troopers. All he wanted was to finish this stretch of the highway, rendezvous with the motorcade at the next checkpoint, and eventually get some sleep. He never saw the local police cruiser coming until its tires screeched onto the pavement of the gas station lot. The patrol car, emblazoned with the county sheriff's logo, angled aggressively in front of Donovan's Suburban, completely blocking his exit. Before the vehicle even came to a complete halt, the doors flew open. The blinding red and blue lights of the light bar sliced through the darkness, casting dizzying shadows across the gas pumps. Officer Bradley Jenkins stepped out of the driver's side. Jenkins was a 10-year veteran of the local force, a man whose reputation for heavy-handed tactics was an open secret in the county. His hand was already resting on the grip of his holstered service weapon. From the passenger side emerged Officer Timothy Miller, a younger, clearly inexperienced rookie who looked more nervous than authoritative. "Hands out of your pockets! Keep them where I can see them!" Jenkins barked, his voice echoing sharply across the empty lot. Donovan didn't flinch. His training instantly kicked in. He knew exactly how these situations unfolded, and he knew that sudden movements were the enemy of survival. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his coffee cup on the roof of the Suburban. He raised both hands to shoulder height, his palms open and facing the officers. "Good evening, officers," Donovan said, his voice calm, steady, and modulated to de-escalate the tension. "My name is Donovan Brooks. I am armed. My weapon is holstered on my right hip, and my federal credentials are in my left breast pocket." Jenkins scoffed, his eyes narrowing as he marched closer. He didn't hear the words federal credentials, or if he did, he chose to ignore them entirely. All Jenkins saw was a black man in a high-end vehicle that he immediately assumed didn't belong to him. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Do it now!" Jenkins shouted, closing the distance. "Officer, I am a sworn federal agent with the United States Secret Service. If you just allow me to—" "I said turn around," Jenkins interrupted, grabbing Donovan roughly by the shoulder and spinning him around. The officer shoved Donovan hard against the armored side of the Suburban. The impact was entirely unnecessary, rattling the coffee cup on the roof. Miller jogged up, looking uncertain. "Brad, maybe we should listen to him. He said he has an ID." "Shut up, Tim. Pat him down," Jenkins snapped. Jenkins aggressively patted down Donovan's sides, his hand immediately finding the concealed Glock 19 on Donovan's hip. "Well, well, well. Carrying a concealed firearm. You got a permit for this, buddy?" "As I stated," Donovan replied, his cheek pressed against the cool metal of the Suburban, his tone remaining infuriatingly calm. "I am a federal agent. The credentials are in my jacket pocket." Jenkins yanked the Glock from Donovan's holster, handing it off to Miller. Then he reached roughly into Donovan's tailored jacket and pulled out the leather credential case. Jenkins flipped it open. Inside sat a gleaming gold star badge and an ID card bearing the seal of the United States Secret Service, alongside Donovan's photograph and clearance codes. Jenkins stared at it for a long moment under the glaring police lights. Then a smirk crept across his face. "Secret Service? Really?" Jenkins laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "This is the best fake I've seen all year. What did you do? Order this off Amazon to impress the ladies down in Atlanta? You think I'm stupid?" Donovan closed his eyes for a brief second, calculating his next move. The cardinal rule of his training was clear. Never fight a uniform on the street. You fight them in a courtroom. You fight them with the full weight of the federal government. Resisting a local cop, even a rogue one, only resulted in tragedy. "Officer Jenkins," Donovan said, reading the man's name tag. "I strongly advise you to run my name through the NCIC database, or call the local field office. I am currently on an active protective assignment." "You're on an active trip to the county jail," Jenkins sneered. He holstered his own weapon, unclipped his handcuffs, and grabbed Donovan's wrists. The metal teeth of the cuffs clicked loudly, biting painfully into Donovan's skin, as Jenkins ratcheted them down as tight as they would go. The pain was immediate, but Donovan's face remained a mask of pure stoicism. He allowed himself to be manhandled, knowing full well that every action Jenkins was taking was sealing the officer's professional doom. The spectacle had drawn an audience. Inside the convenience store, Amanda Collins stood frozen behind the glass, her eyes wide as she watched the impeccably dressed man being shoved around like a common criminal. Across the street, at a 24-hour diner, a man named Greg Peterson had walked out and was holding up his smartphone, the red recording light blinking steadily as he documented the entire exchange. "Get in the back of the cruiser," Jenkins ordered, shoving Donovan toward the squad car. "I cannot abandon that vehicle, officer," Donovan stated firmly, planting his feet for a moment. "It contains classified communications equipment and federal property. If you leave it unsecured, you are committing a federal crime." "I'm impounding the car," Jenkins retorted. "I'm going to search this stolen rig top to bottom." Donovan allowed himself to be pushed into the cramped, plastic-seated back of the patrol car. The doors slammed shut, trapping him in the claustrophobic space. Through the reinforced glass, he watched as Jenkins approached the Suburban. Miller, the rookie, was holding Donovan's federal ID, staring at it under his flashlight. "Brad," Miller called out, his voice trembling slightly. "The holograms on this ID, they look real, like really real. And the watermark. It's a good fake, Tim. Stop being a coward." Jenkins dismissed him, yanking the driver's side door of the Suburban open. Because Donovan was merely pumping gas, the vehicle was unlocked. As Jenkins leaned inside, his smug expression began to falter, replaced by a momentary look of profound confusion. The interior of the Suburban did not look like a civilian vehicle. The center console had been entirely ripped out and replaced with a complex, glowing array of encrypted Motorola APX radios, a Panasonic Toughbook mounted on a swivel arm, and a siren/light controller. A heavy steel lockbox was bolted to the floorboard. "What the hell?" Jenkins muttered. He climbed into the back seat. There, resting on the premium leather, was a heavy tactical plate carrier. Jenkins shined his flashlight on it. Embroidered in bold, high-visibility yellow letters across the back were the words, "Police, U.S. Secret Service." Beside the vest was a biometric rifle safe, securely housing a fully automatic Colt M4 carbine. For a brief second, reality threatened to penetrate Jenkins's arrogance. The sheer cost and complexity of the equipment were impossible to fake. A logical officer would have immediately realized they had made a catastrophic error. They would have uncuffed the man, apologized profusely, and prayed to keep their pension. But Jenkins was not a logical officer. He was a man driven by ego, bias, and an absolute refusal to admit he was wrong. In his mind, backing down meant losing face in front of his rookie and the civilians watching. Jenkins climbed out of the Suburban, his face flushed red with anger. He stomped over to the patrol car and yanked the rear door open, looming over Donovan. "Who the hell are you working for?" Jenkins demanded, spittle flying from his lips. "You stole a federal vehicle. You're impersonating a federal agent. You're in possession of stolen government property and illegal automatic weapons. You are going away for life, boy." Donovan sat perfectly still in the back of the cruiser. Despite his wrists throbbing from the over-tightened cuffs, his voice remained eerily calm, possessing the chilling authority of a man who held all the cards. "Officer Jenkins," Donovan said, looking the enraged cop dead in the eyes, "you have exactly 3 minutes to take these handcuffs off me. If you do, I will simply report your insubordination to your captain, and this ends with a severe reprimand. If you do not take them off, you're going to lose your badge, your freedom, and everything you have ever worked for." Jenkins let out a bark of laughter. "You threatening me? While you're in my cuffs?" "It's not a threat. It's an operational reality," Donovan replied evenly. "Look at my lapel." Jenkins shined his light on Donovan's jacket. Woven discreetly into the fabric was a tiny, high-tech microphone wire leading up to a flesh-colored earpiece that had partially dislodged during the scuffle. Suddenly, a loud, static-laced burst of audio erupted from the open door of the Suburban. The encrypted radio system inside the vehicle had just come alive. A deep, commanding voice boomed over the high-wattage speakers of the Suburban, carrying across the quiet gas station lot. "Shadow 1, this is Vanguard Base. Motorcade is crossing the county line. ETA to your position is exactly 4 mics. Status on the refueling, over." Miller turned pale. He looked at Jenkins, sheer panic setting in. "Brad, that's military comms. They're talking about a motorcade." Jenkins's jaw tightened. He stormed over to the Suburban, reached into the console, and aggressively twisted the volume knob until the radio clicked off. He was doubling down. He refused to be intimidated by a voice on a radio. He walked back to the cruiser and pointed a finger in Donovan's face. "I don't care what kind of scanner app you have hooked up to your buddy's radio. I am the law in this county, and you're going to a cell." Donovan didn't blink. "My special agent in charge, William Carter, is in the lead vehicle of that motorcade. When they pull up and find their advance agent handcuffed in the back of a local cruiser, this stops being a traffic stop. It becomes a federal incident of unlawful detention of a federal officer. 3 minutes, Jenkins." "Shut the door, Tim," Jenkins yelled at the rookie. "We're taking him to booking." "Brad, wait," Miller pleaded, practically begging now. He was looking down the long, dark stretch of Interstate 95. "Brad, look." Jenkins turned around. In the distance, cresting the highway overpass about 2 miles away, was a sea of flashing lights. It wasn't just one police car. It was a terrifying, overwhelming armada. Dozens of red and blue strobes painted the night sky, accompanied by the distinct, heavy rumble of high-powered engines roaring down the interstate. It looked like a small army was descending upon Camden County. It was the United States Secret Service presidential motorcade, flanked by 24 state highway patrol interceptors, and their lead scout vehicle was currently being illegally searched by a rogue local cop. Donovan leaned back against the hard plastic seat of the cruiser, a cold, grim satisfaction settling over him. The 3 minutes were up. The Karma was about to arrive, and it was coming at 90 miles an hour. The low, rumbling hum of heavy engines vibrated through the asphalt of the Chevron gas station, shaking the half-empty display racks inside the convenience store. Amanda Collins pressed her hands against the glass doors, her breath fogging the pain as she stared out at the unfolding spectacle. Greg Peterson, still standing near the diner across the street, kept his smartphone raised, his hands trembling slightly as the sheer scale of the approaching motorcade became terrifyingly clear. The armada did not merely pull into the gas station, it consumed it. 4 sleek, heavy-duty Georgia State Patrol Dodge Chargers swarmed the lot first, their aggressive engines roaring before they braked sharply, angling themselves to completely seal off the exit and entrance ramps. Following immediately behind them were 6 identical, heavily armored Chevrolet Suburbans, identical in every way to the one currently being unlawfully searched by Officer Bradley Jenkins. The massive federal vehicles moved with synchronized predatory precision. They swooped into the lot, completely boxing in the lone county police cruiser. The blinding barrage of red, blue, and white strobes turned the dark, humid Georgia night into a chaotic, dizzying daylight. The sheer noise of the idling V8 engines and the crackle of overlapping police radios created an atmosphere of absolute authority. Officer Timothy Miller stumbled backward, his hands instinctively raising in the air, his face completely drained of blood. He dropped Donovan's federal ID credential case onto the pavement, his knees physically shaking as doors began to fly open simultaneously across the convoy. From the state patrol cruisers, heavily armed troopers stepped out, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. From the black Suburbans, over a dozen men and women in tailored suits and tactical earpieces emerged with fluid, practiced speed. Their eyes were constantly moving, scanning the perimeter, the diner, the store, and finally locking onto the small-town police cruiser parked aggressively near pump number 4. Officer Jenkins stood absolutely frozen beside the open door of Donovan's advanced scout vehicle. The arrogant smirk that had plastered his face just 3 minutes prior had completely evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, crushing wave of dread. He tried to swallow, but his throat was completely dry. His brain, clouded by years of unchecked local power, was desperately struggling to process the monumental magnitude of his error. From the lead suburban, Special Agent in Charge William Carter stepped out onto the pavement. Carter was a physically imposing man in his late 50s, possessing a stern, weathered face that had seen decades of high-stakes federal operations. He wore a heavy tactical vest over his dress shirt, the golden seal of the Secret Service gleaming under the chaotic strobe lights. Carter's cold, furious eyes swept the scene, instantly assessing the situation. He saw the open doors of the scout vehicle. He saw the terrified rookie. And then he saw Donovan Brooks, his best advance agent, sitting in the cramped back seat of the local police cruiser, securely handcuffed. Carter did not walk. He marched. He moved toward Jenkins with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train. Beside him walked Captain Robert Henderson of the Georgia State Patrol, a man whose scowl was so deep it looked permanently etched into his face. "Step away from that vehicle immediately," Carter's voice boomed, cutting through the noise of the engines. It was not a request. It was an absolute, non-negotiable command that carried the full, terrifying weight of the United States federal government. Jenkins flinched, instinctively taking a step back, his hand nervously twitching toward his duty belt. It was the worst possible reaction he could have had. In a fraction of a second, the posture of every single federal agent and state trooper in the lot shifted. Hands dropped to holstered weapons. The air grew instantly, agonizingly tense. "Do not touch that firearm, son," Captain Henderson barked, stepping forward, his own hand firmly gripping his sidearm. "You take your hand off that belt right this second, or this night is going to end in a way you will not walk away from." Jenkins threw his hands into the air, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. I'm a sworn law enforcement officer. I was conducting a felony stop. This man is in possession of stolen federal property and forged government documents." Carter stopped a mere 2 feet from Jenkins, towering over the local cop. The sheer disdain radiating from the special agent in charge was palpable. Carter looked down at the federal credential case lying abandoned on the greasy pavement near Miller's feet. He bent down, picked it up, and wiped the dirt from the leather. "You mean these documents?" Carter asked, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, icy tone. He held the badge up right in front of Jenkins's trembling face. "The fully authenticated, biometric-secured credentials of Special Agent Donovan Brooks, a man who has served his country with more honor in the last 10 years than you could muster in 3 lifetimes. He didn't look right," Jenkins stammered, frantically searching for an excuse, his profound ignorance laid bare for everyone to see. "He was driving this rig. He had concealed weapons. I thought it was a sophisticated fake. I have jurisdiction here." "You don't have jurisdiction over the federal government," Carter snarled, stepping closer until Jenkins had to lean back against the pump to avoid touching him. "And you certainly do not have the jurisdiction to unlawfully detain a federal agent conducting advance operations for a Level 1 protective detail. You illegally searched a heavily classified government vehicle. You disconnected military-grade communications equipment. You have just committed multiple federal felonies in the span of 5 minutes because your fragile ego couldn't handle a black man in a suit telling you the truth." Carter turned his back in disgust and walked straight to the police cruiser. He yanked the rear door open. Donovan sat there, his expression perfectly stoic, though his shoulders were tight from the painful angle of the handcuffs. "You good, Brooks?" Carter asked, his voice softening just a fraction. "I'm fine, boss. Cuffs are a bit tight." I advised him of my status. He declined to verify. Donovan reported professionally, not a single hint of vindictiveness in his voice. He had won the moment the motorcade arrived. He didn't need to gloat. Carter turned his head, his eyes locking onto the terrified rookie, Timothy Miller. "Get over here and take these cuffs off my agent. Now." Miller scrambled forward, his hands shaking so violently he could barely get the small key into the keyhole. It took him 3 agonizing tries, the metal clicking loudly in the quiet tension of the gas station, before the ratchets finally released. Donovan stepped out of the cruiser, rubbing his raw, bruised wrists. He quietly retrieved his Glock 19 from the front seat of the patrol car, checked the chamber, and slid it back into his hip holster. Jenkins watched, paralyzed, as his entire career dissolved into ash before his very eyes. The absolute power he usually wielded over the citizens of Camden County meant absolutely nothing here. He was a small, arrogant fish who had just jumped headfirst into a tank full of great white sharks. The fallout was instantaneous, brutal, and flawlessly executed by the book. There would be no professional courtesy extended. There would be no sweeping this under the rug with a polite phone call to the local sheriff. Jenkins had crossed a line that federal agencies do not forgive. "Captain Henderson," Carter said, adjusting his suit jacket, "I'm formally requesting the immediate arrest of this individual for the unlawful detention of a federal officer, assault on a federal officer, and tampering with classified government property." Henderson nodded grimly. He gestured to 2 massive state troopers. "Cuff him." Jenkins's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as the 2 troopers advanced on him. "Wait! No! You can't do this! I have qualified immunity. I was acting in good faith. I made a mistake, that's all." "Ignorance is not a defense for violating federal law, and bias is not a substitute for probable cause," Captain Henderson replied coldly. "Turn around, Jenkins. Hands behind your back." The irony was thick and suffocating. Less than 10 minutes after tightly ratcheting his own handcuffs onto Donovan's wrists, Jenkins found himself being violently spun around and shoved against the very same gas pump. The cold steel of the trooper's handcuffs bit into Jenkins's wrists. The sound of the metal teeth clicking shut echoed loudly in the humid night air, a symphony of pure, unfiltered karma. Jenkins broke down. The tough, overbearing bully who had terrorized the local highways for a decade completely shattered. He began to openly weep, his sobs pathetic and loud as he was dragged toward the back of a state patrol cruiser. "Please, I have a pension. I have a family. Don't do this," Jenkins begged, looking desperately at Donovan. "Tell them, man. Tell them it was just a misunderstanding." Donovan stood quietly by the side of his armored Suburban, sipping the coffee that was still resting perfectly on the roof of the vehicle. He looked at Jenkins with cold, professional detachment. "I gave you 3 minutes, Officer Jenkins," Donovan said softly, though the words carried perfectly to the disgraced cop. "You chose this." Jenkins was shoved into the back of the cruiser, the door slamming shut, sealing his fate just as he had tried to seal Donovan's. Timothy Miller, the young rookie, stood entirely alone, looking like he was waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. Captain Henderson walked over to him, pointing a stern finger directly at the young man's chest. "You," Henderson growled. "You are suspended pending a full internal affairs investigation. Hand over your badge and your sidearm to the shift sergeant when they arrive. Your saving grace tonight is that you didn't touch the agent, and you hesitated. Next time your partner breaks the law, you arrest him, or you go down with him. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Miller whispered, tears streaming down his face as he unclipped his gun belt and laid it gently on the trunk of the empty county cruiser. Across the street, Greg Peterson lowered his phone. He had captured every single second in glorious, high-definition video. The footage would be uploaded before the sun even rose, ensuring that the local police department could not hide behind press releases or fabricated reports. The world would see exactly what happened when unchecked arrogance collided with unyielding federal authority. The motorcade could not wait. The VIP was secure in the holding pattern, but they needed to keep moving. Carter clapped Donovan on the shoulder. "Get in the rig, Brooks. We have a schedule to keep," Carter said, turning back toward the lead vehicle. Donovan nodded. He picked up his coffee, slid into the driver's seat of the Suburban, and closed the heavy armored door. He re-engaged the encrypted radio, the green lights of the Motorola console glowing warmly in the dark cabin. He shifted the massive vehicle into drive. With a roar of engines, the Federal Armada pulled out of the Chevron station, leaving the flashing lights of the state troopers behind to clean up the monumental mess. The motorcade vanished down Interstate 95, a dark streak of power and precision moving relentlessly through the Georgia night. The legal consequences for Bradley Jenkins were swift and devastating. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took over the case the following morning. Jenkins was charged under 18 U.S.C. Section 111 for assaulting and impeding a federal officer, as well as federal civil rights violations. His local department, terrified of the catastrophic liability and the viral video that had garnered millions of views within hours, immediately terminated his employment and revoked his pension. 6 months later, a federal judge in Atlanta looked down at Bradley Jenkins, now stripped of his uniform and wearing standard-issue prison orange, and handed down a sentence of 48 months in a federal penitentiary. The judge specifically noted that Jenkins's actions were driven by blatant racial profiling and a complete disregard for the law he was sworn to uphold. Karma had not just knocked on Bradley Jenkins's door, it had kicked it off the hinges, burned the house down, and salted the earth where it stood. And Donovan Brooks, the silent professional, never gave the arrogant cop a second thought, continuing his duty in the shadows, protecting the very fabric of the nation. If this shocking story of instant karma and justice served kept you on the edge of your seat, we have plenty more thrilling, real-life encounters to share. Don't let the algorithm hide our next jaw-dropping video from you. Hit that subscribe button right now, smash the like icon, and share this story with your friends to show that true justice always prevails. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on how this officer handled the situation. See you next time.